Michael, even as you're talking about some of the regulatory practices of the town, and that's something that you're taking aim at in your campaign, as we're sitting here, and I'll say that it is Saturday morning, June 11, our chain of newspapers, Penny Saver Community, and our news website, ncnlocal.com, we just broke a story this morning. We have the exclusive on this about a state controller audit report on the town of Yorktown that, in summary, basically alleges all kinds of unregulated practices, ironically, saying how credit cards are issued to town officials or employees, and the town controller told the auditor she doesn't know who has credit cards, what the spending limit is, what they spend, and then other examples of no-bid contracts. So it seems like, based on the controller's report, there's also a lot of unregulated practices, right?
Well, when the rubber hits the pavement, so to speak, they may be not being watched or dogged as they should, and that's an issue essentially for at the end of the day for the town board, because it's the town board that passes the final approving resolution to accept bids and making payments. These practices aren't unregulated; they actually are very tightly regulated. The problem is whether the regulations are being followed, and in that respect, it's a matter of procedure. You follow procedure, and procedures needs to be followed, and the town board is the one that needs to follow those procedures. In other words, the town board makes the final resolution in accepting bids, and what's bid and what's not bid. It's the town board that is where the buck, so to speak, stops.
And by the way, we should clarify that in the state controller's audit report, it specifically covers the period January 1, 2007 to May 2010. Right. So, they only focused on that period, and it's important to note that. So are you saying that during that period, it's the town board is accountable for any of these allegations that prove to be true?
At this point, you're right. There are only allegations. Who knows what the evidence is? And I think the town has the opportunity to respond, which it hasn't. The issue with purchases is that the general municipal law does cover what needs to be bid, what doesn't have to be bid. And at the end of the day, it's up to the town board to pass those resolutions in accepting or rejecting or awarding bids. So it's really rests with the town board has to scrutinize those, and it's part of procedure. So if the proper procedures are set in place, proper checklist of procedures are set in place, hopefully you don't have any miscues in terms of what's being bid and what's being awarded and what's not being bid. So it's a matter of following proper procedure.
And who is responsible for making sure that those, it's the so-called red tape is being followed?
Well, at the end of the day, I've been town attorney for a lot of years, and what we would do is when you send out a bid and you get responses on the bids, you make sure that your responses meet your bid specs, and if they don't, or if you have anomalies in terms of responses or serious departures from the bid, you look at the bid specs to make sure the bid specs are clear. Make sure that your bidding in terms of your bid specs are properly drafted in order to get the right and proper bids back. But at the end of the day, it's you check the bid specifications against what's the bids that are coming in.
And the town attorney personally does that, or?
Well, in my day, yeah, we scrutinize things. Examples are, with vehicles, there's a lot of differences between one vehicle and another vehicle. You can have a radio delete. Sometimes deleting radios are more expensive than keeping them in. So you're careful as to what the equipment is that you're bidding. The competitive bidding rules are very, very important in terms of maintaining the integrity of the fiduciary obligation of the town board to its taxpayers. It's procedural. It usually would be a checklist. And the board has the final say in approving or disapproving anything that's bid or not bid. So I think that eventually that has to be examined as to what were the purposes, what were the reasons why things failed to meet the requirements of the bidding law, if in fact that proves to be the case.
And you also say in your statement, you make the general point that there seem to be, factions in town, and they fall into two distinct categories. One is people who want to preserve the character of the town through such, things as open space. There was this extremely controversial tree cutting law that opponents felt impinged on, their personal property. And at the same time, there are those who feel the town doesn't do enough to support, encourage, bring in new business and develop the economy. And so the point that you're making is those two are not mutually exclusive, they're mutually dependent, right? That you need a vibrant local economy to preserve the character of the town.
Absolutely. Look, as far as I go, there's glaring examples of that. As for instance, the town bought Granite Knolls off of Stony Street. And
Where Phoenix House is.
yeah, and spent a lot of money doing so. I have a particular issue with the open space fund and how it is the money's collected. You'll if you look at it, it's collected on a per capita basis, which shouldn't be. It should be collected on an ad valorem basis. But putting that aside, and what the town has been in this practice of purchasing large tracts of land, which, ironically, under their own land use regulations, are minimally developable. And it's at the same time you have the tax. The homeowners at the town of Yorktown can only pay their, have struggling to pay their real estate tax. Shadow Creek is another big piece of property that was taken off the tax rolls. And you have, there was the town had purchased one of my clients' properties that were at the foot of Turkey Mountain. It was a 25-acre parcel that the town regulations allowed for 3 lots. So 3 lots on 25 acres. Town didn't want to see the 3 lots on the 25 acres. Purchased the property for $1.5 million. I don't think that's a prudent use of the town money, especially when the footprint of the houses probably took up less than an acre, and the proposed development preserved almost 99% of the balance of the property. Why would the town need to feel compelled to spend $1.5 million of taxpayer money on preserving what is not developable in the first place? And it's, believe it's fiscally irresponsible. But all that aside, what really needs to be done if you're going to strike this proper balance is you have to have an honest assessment of the land that's being presented before you, and its development potential, and you have to look at the environmental laws that we have passed over the years, which grew out of the late 80s and early 90s when development was very hot, or have to be are now used where they weren't intended to be used, which is to just quash any type of development whatsoever, and that was not their purpose. And what's happening is that you're getting a lot of counterproductive approvals, and I say counterproductive to the intent of the original environmental regulation, because of the way they're being applied. And as for instance, at one point in time, the town had proposed a 4-acre zoning for areas south of Jacob Road, and believe it or not, the DEP of New York City DEP, which had a lot of input into the rezoning, suggested that the upzoning to 4 acres from proposed 2 acres was actually more detrimental to the environment, because what it did, it was spread out what would be the disturbance over a greater span of land than would be the 2 acres, believe it or not. So there are things that you have to actually look at the consequences, the actual consequences, and sometimes unintended, which are unintended consequences of some of the land use regulations.